Hey everyone, I'm Alyssa. Today I want to do the mid-year freakout tag along with the mid-year check-in tag, throwing my own spin on things since I'm already very late to this party. Anyway, I'm gonna do both of these tags in part because they have a lot of overlapping questions, but the ones that are different I thought were really interesting, and sort of both of them address questions that I wanted to talk about in giving myself a check-in about my reading. I will put all of the questions for both of the tags down below so you can see what all those questions are, but I've actually really meshed these together. I have rearranged all of the questions so that they're grouped together in a way that I think is more cohesive, and another reason why is because there are a few questions that have the same book as an answer. I'll just talk about that one book and all the questions that that book is an answer to. Anyway, I think that's all the preamble we need, and let's get straight to it. First question, how many books have you read so far this year? I have read 25 books so far this year, which I think is great. Like, nothing to be ashamed of. Compared to at least the last 2 years, that's a lot less than I have normally read by this point in the year, and on this platform I would say that's definitely a lower number than is typical, but I'm very pleased with myself, in part because there was a really slow start to the year. For example, between January and April I only read 5 books, so I began 2020 in a real reading slump, and I was trying to pull myself out of it, but it took quite a while. In May and June I read 21 books, and then so far in July I have read 4 books. I'm going to include those 4 books in this check-in because I think that my reading in the second half of the year is going to be far more substantial than the first part of the year, so these have a greater selection to choose from in answering these questions. Only 2 nonfiction, so definitely primarily fiction thus far. I'm really feeling fiction and I'm good with that. Let's see, the mid-year check-in tag asks, what is your favorite book so far this year? While the mid-year freakout tag asks the best book you've read so far in 2020. Now, I know that I'm being a bit particular about semantics, but asking what the best book I've read so far is an incredibly different question than my favorite book I've read so far this year, which is, first off, like right off the bat, one of the reasons I want to do both of these tags, because I think that's very interesting to give the answer to both of those questions. So as far as the best book I've read that so far this year, to me that is really emphasizing the idea of like literary quality. Both Winter by Ali Smith and The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan stood out head above the rest as books that just really amazed me while I was reading them. I thought that they were of great literary quality. They're captivated by just like the skill and craft that I was consuming. I just felt like they were really, really accomplished books. To put it simply, I would divide my contenders for favorite books as those that are very intellectually engaging, those that are emotionally poignant, and then those that are just simply enjoyable reads. Those are kind of 3 categories that books can really stand out for for me, but I don't think that they should necessarily compete with each other because I think that those are like different categories. So the books that I found most intellectually engaging are the 2 I already mentioned, The Joy Luck Club and Winter, but I would also add The Trick is to Keep Breathing by Janice Galloway. Very sluggish and repetitive in his writing style, and is literally about grief and depression and death, so it was not like an enjoyable read, but it made me think so much that it just really kind of stands out as a book from my first half of the year that has sort of stuck with me in a weird way. So I think it's of merit to mention here. Books that were emotionally poignant, The Joy Luck Club definitely fits into this category as well. The emotions just really hit me. I thought, like, it made me cry. Another book that really got me emotionally invested was The Widows of Malabar Hill by Sujata Massey. This book, I will talk about this more in this video, because I have more to say about this book, but definitely was an emotional ride. This is also the first book in the Perveen mystery series. And those first 2 books of that series, the only 2 that have come out, are definitely, so far this year, the most enjoyable books that I've read. I whipped through them, loved them, and I would also add Home Fire and Americana to this list as well. Constantly wanting to pick it up again and get back to the book, and that is just a really, really enjoyable experience that deserves to be noted. Like, that is a really great quality in a book. So the next series of questions, which I've lumped together, there's similar versions of this question on both lists, on both tags, which is asking what is your most disappointing book of the year and what is your most surprising book that you read this year. I do think that these are a bit interesting questions because they reflect more on your expectations that you had for a book before you began it than I think that they reflect on the actual book. Especially in my case, I don't necessarily think that all of these books, for example, that I will answer as disappointments, I don't think that they were bad books. They just didn't live up to what I expected, which is fair enough. That's the question. So I'd definitely say Atonement by Ian McEwan. Just didn't understand what the hype was about. The Overstory by Richard Powers. I've talked about this book on my channel before. I definitely don't think this is a bad book. I just think it didn't fit. There were things about the writing style that didn't work for me, and I think I didn't exactly read it at a good time. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I only give it 2 stars, and I think that I just didn't find it really, really remarkable, and I especially felt that there were some missed opportunities. Longbourn by Joe Baker, rather underwhelming, and I Capture the Castle by Jodie Smith is probably the book on here that stands out the most as one that I actually felt the most emotional disappointment. I think the others were just well, that was not that remarkable, but this one I felt a bit mad at the book because I felt like there were problems in it, and I was sort of mad that it was praised and loved because there were things I didn't like about it. Yeah, those were my disappointments. As far as surprises, definitely my biggest surprise was Winter by Ali Smith, which is very interestingly not about the expectations I had before I started the book being surpassed. The reason that this was a surprise for me is because I started it in February. I read the first 20 pages and I wasn't into it, I wasn't loving it, and so I DNF'd it. I decided to put it aside and I didn't want to read it, but lo and behold, the silver lining of a global pandemic is that I couldn't return my library books, and so at some point in April I noticed it sitting on my shelf. I decided maybe I didn't give it quite the chance it deserved, and I picked it up again and ended up loving it. One of my favorite books. So that was definitely a very big surprise. I'm gonna end up talking about the same books over and over and over again in this video, but I would also have to mention The Widows of Malabar Hill. I think I found this book, I think it was recommended to me by Goodreads, and the cover just appealed to me, and I think because I hadn't heard of it anywhere, that sort of automatically gave it slightly lower expectations, and because something about the cover just looks a bit like a beach read, kind of this fun mystery. It's about a 1920s woman who's a lawyer in Bombay, and it just felt like this was going to be sort of a feminist historical fiction mystery, just a fun whodunit kind of thing, but in reading this, it tore my emotions apart. I was sobbing at some parts of it. I was really tense, and I was really into this book, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But not only that, but I think it handled very well and discusses some very complex social issues and historical issues of the time, the perspective that it takes on gender dynamics and sexism, not only in India that are exist in the legal system and in the politics and social structure of the era, but also within different religious dynamics, and this is really, really well researched. It talks about all kinds of different religions that are coexisting in Bombay and the way that women are treated in these different religions during the period. This is not an area or period that I'm very particularly well versed in from a historical perspective, and so I just have to trust that the author has done her research. But what it appears to me is to have been done very, very well. So I think that I was just surprised by the quality and complexity and depth of this book, and sort of the hard-hitting issues that it decided to address, when I was really expecting just kind of a breezy, light beach read kind of a thing. That's why that one is a surprise for me. Next question is, what genres have I read the most of this year? Definitely just general fiction and literary fiction, and I am really trying to work through some modern classics. The next several questions are all about the same book. I'm embarrassed. I'm just gonna end up ranting about this series that I've already talked about, the Proving Mystery series. The best sequel that I have read so far this year is definitely The September Moonstone, which is the sequel to The Widows of Malabar Hill. Not only is this the best sequel I've read by far, but I actually enjoyed the sequel more than the first book. And I can see, like, I think that they're really equal in merit, but I just personally enjoyed the second one. Next questions are my new favorite character and newest fictional crush. My new favorite character is definitely Proving Mystery, which is the main character. She's a lawyer. I wouldn't say we get like a really detailed profile on her. It's more seeing her interactions and just like the way she thinks that she's sort of solving these mysteries. But I just think she's really like sharp, and I think she's a very interesting character. I think a runner-up for this position would also be Ifemelu from Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is just a very strong female lead. I also really liked her. As for the newest fictional crush, I do have an answer to this question, but it's a bit tricky because it is a character in the September Moonstone, and this character, however, I feel that if I say anything about them, it would actually be a spoiler to the first book. Perhaps a mild spoiler, but I just don't want to say anything. Anyway, yeah. Book that made you happy. September Moonstone. Name a new favorite author that you've discovered this year. I'm going to say Sujata Massey. I really, really like her writing style, and I think she's great. I'm also going to say Ali Smith, which is a bit of a cheat because technically I read one of her books before 2020, but I did not understand the genius of Ali Smith when I read Autumn, like in 2018. So I very much feel like I actually was introduced to her this year, and I finished winter with a very distinct thought of wanting to go and search out her backlog and to read some of her other books. Books that made me cry. This is not a very hard thing to do. I mean, it takes something, but not a lot. Definitely The Joy Luck Club. I think Kitchen and Moonlight Shadow made me cry. The Windows of Malabar Hill. There were parts of Normal People that made me cry. The Remains of the Day. Oh, Americana made me cry as well. Yeah. I do cry in quite a few books, actually, and I really love it when a book can make me cry, actually. Okay, the next two questions I'm lumping together, which is a bit weird, but stick with me. The next questions are, what are your most anticipated releases for the rest of the year? And then new releases you haven't read yet but want to. I do not pay much attention to new releases, like what's coming up, so I would normally have no answer to this question of like anticipated releases, but I will tell you, uniquely, I was very excited. This book, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, to come out, and it was going to be my answer for the most anticipated books, but it came out on the 7th, and today is the 10th. So if I had been faster at making this video, I would have an answer for my anticipated books, but now this is just a new release that I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to. I just picked up from the library yesterday, and I got the first copy because I put it on hold like a month ago before it had come out, and I'm really pleased with myself for doing that. Other new releases, The Vanishing Half, which everyone's talking about, by Britt Bennett. I also have The Magical Language of Others by E.J. Koh, K-O-H. This says new on it from my library. That's for the most part the only way that I know this is a new release. I do definitely have a few others that I'm aware of came out in the last like 6 months to 2 years. But once you extend to like the last year, I have a lot of books then that I want to read. I do have many more, so I'll just leave it at that, I guess. The most beautiful book I bought so far this year is Half a Lifelong Romance by Lin Chang. This is a translated work from Chinese, and the cover, I don't know if you can really tell, but this is sort of like a textured paper. It's not really, it just looks like textured paper. And I love this like stroke calligraphy here, and this little stamp bit I think is really elegant. However, I do not buy many books, so not to negate the beauty of this book, but it only had about 5 other books to compete with. So the next question I have here, which is from the MidYear Check In Tag, I know, is asking what your bookish highlight is. What has been the best part of my reading year so far was getting myself out of a reading slump. Like I said, I had a very slow start to the year, and I was definitely trying to pick up books that I thought would help me to get back into reading. I knew that books would make me really happy. I knew that I wanted to be reading, but I just had no appetite for it, and I thought if I could just find the right book that would work. And I think that that I was able to sort of jumpstart myself out of this reading slump that lasted like 9 months. It was quite a reading slump, and so I think my reading highlight is just like feeling the enthusiasm for reading again. Furthermore, just in the last 2 months, I have found new favorites. More new favorites than I did in all of 2019, which, to be fair, might be a bit of an explanation for the reading slump in the first place. So I'm really glad to not only have the enthusiasm for reading again, but to be finding books that are helping to sustain that enthusiasm going forward. What is your next big priority for your reading? I do kind of have like a summer reading, like summer classics reading list, but that is shifting and not very permanent. Aside from that, the only other list that I have that I'm currently working on is actually at the moment just a shelf or a tag on my Goodreads, so you can check out my Goodreads if you want to see it. But I have a tag that is books I should have read in high school, and then I do have like a working list that's books I should have read in college, which I will work on after I finish high school. And these are exactly what the shelf says. There are really many books that kind of fit into this category, and most people aren't required to read all of them, but I want to be familiar with these books. And the last question, because we need to wrap this up, we're losing light, and this is getting very long. The last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I actually have like 3 answers to this question, and I don't mean 3 books, I mean like 3 different categories of answers. First off, I don't have too much of a physical TBR, though I'd love to eliminate it completely. I'm just going to show you 5 books that I have in my TBR that I am the most interested in getting to this year. You've probably seen a few people talk about Dune by Frank Herbert. There's a movie coming out at the end of the year. This is a beast, so I don't consider this an easy task. Flights by Olga Tokarczuk, translated by Jennifer Croft. This I picked up really spontaneously and in a bookstore in Scotland. I would really like to read this before it goes too much longer. I have the Poetry Pharmacy, and then Touched by Fire by Kay Redfield Jameson, and this is one of my art history books that I really want to get to. The book is about the idea of the tortured artist and like mental illness and artists and their art and our perception of artists with mental illness. As I already mentioned, Half a Lifelong Romance by Lin Chang. I have not read this yet, and I would love to read it before the end of the year. Other books that I really want to get to are books that have been on my TBR for a really long time. The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry is a book I've had out from the library multiple times, and so far I have had this from the library since January. I think that one of the reasons why I want to make this such a priority is because it was one of the first books that I added to my TBR after discovering BookTube, and with a lot of enthusiasm. And so in a way, because it's taken me so long to get to it, there's becoming like a bit of a mental wall between me and it, and I'm afraid that like the longer it goes on, the more that I'm just going to think of this as a book always accessible. I'm going to like it when I get around to it, but there's no rush. Milkman, which I have here by Anna Burns, it's beginning to fall into that same kind of mental category. My year of rest and relaxation. This one is starting to feel that same way too. Oh, this is also a book that I own, so it would be part of my physical TBR that I'm trying to get down, but Villette by Charlotte Bronte is another book that I've been very excited about reading in the last few months. I've also decided I really want to read Pride and Prejudice. Hopefully this July. I'm waiting to get the annotated version from the library, which I think will really enhance the experience, and Jane Eyre, probably in Victober. Both of these are books that I read in high school, not like for high school, but when I was that age, which is coming up on being like 9, maybe 10 years ago, and I loved them at the time, but I think that enough time has passed that revisiting these books will be a very novel and new experience, and I'm very interested to go back and see how I appreciate these books as a more mature and experienced reader. I think that will be great fun, and I'm looking forward to both of those. And then last of all, and holy cow, I've had a long answer to this question, and to tag this on the end is really a big thing, but I have decided to do a master's program this fall in English Modern Literature, but I have not received yet the reading list for the courses. That is starting to make me feel just a little bit anxious, but once I receive those reading lists, I think I will have a lot more modern literature books that I'll be adding to my list of books that I have to read before the end of the year. So we will wait and see what those are. Until I receive that list, I will diligently be working on all of these other ones. So I'm really glad to have this video as a bit of a record of not only what I've read so far this year, but like how I'm feeling right now concerning my reading, my trajectory of my reading pace based on the last few months would result in me reading a lot more in the second half of the year, and I think that 2020 will end up being a very asymmetrical reading year in terms of the first half and second half of the year. So hopefully this proves to be an especially helpful and useful video, and though it is a little bit late, I am glad to join in the fun. Thank you very much for caring about what I read. I would love to hear what some of your guys' favorite reads so far have been. If you have any particular thoughts on the books that I've mentioned, would love your opinion. Please share it down below. I think that should be about it. This is very, very long. Thanks so much for joining, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye!